Gohar Shahi Marhaba, and good evening to everybody. One of the many divine signs that are attributed to the awaited one is the sign of modern technologies, ultra modern technologies. And with the help of this technology, the communication gap is almost gone. Although we have developed an addictive dependency on these technologies. However, these technologies have helped human beings do so many things at a time which were not possible 20 years ago. And this is not a coincidence. I would like to give you a comparative view of the Goharian philosophy of divine love, Goharian mystical doctrine, and its relation with ultra modern technologies. And I want to draw your attention towards the title page of His Holiness Gohar Shahi's Book of Divine Love, which poses a challenge to those who reject spiritual sciences. It's so wonderful how we make use of iMessages, emails, and then Twitter and Facebook. For example, you can attach a video file, an audio file, an image, a speech with email, and you can wirelessly send it from one device to another device, regardless of the distance between two devices. Whether one device is in United States of America and the other device is in Australia, almost 10, 12,000 miles away from each destination. I mean, how audio and video is wirelessly transmitted from one device into another device is nothing but a miracle. How this is done is understandable to those who have knowledge of science. Now, these individuals who understand that images and audio files and video files can be transferred from one device into another device wirelessly to any distance, they cannot deny the fact that God's voice, God's image, can be transferred from the heart of a spiritual master into the heart of a spiritual disciple wirelessly. This has never happened before. So many messengers were descended into our planet. So many great, grand messengers came to this world. However, this ultra-modern technology did not exist. And everything happens for a reason. And the most probable reason that I can think of is that this ultra-modern technology in the era of the awaited one is telling us that what you see in the phenomenal world can be verified with divine technologies that exists in the esoteric world. Since the knowledge, the ultra advanced spiritual knowledge has been laid before us by His Divine Grace, Lord Ra Riaz Gohar Shahi, we can relate to it because we have similar technology in front of our eyes. If we did not have this technology, maybe people would be in great, enormous amount of doubt as to how voice or moving picture can be transferred from the heart of a spiritual guide into the heart of a spiritual disciple. But since you have that device in your hand and you use it every day, and after you have used this technology and you have developed a habit of using this technology, when this doctrine of ultra modern spiritual sciences is introduced to you, you already have an example. You can relate to this knowledge. This knowledge was hidden. This knowledge was not given to any messenger, to any prophet. Therefore, they did not need an example in the phenomenal world to which they could relate this knowledge and verify themselves that this is true knowledge. Television appeared to be one of the most entertaining technologies. I still remember in late 70s, there were black and white televisions. Still, people were very happy. They found a way of killing time. They found a way of entertaining themselves to get rid of boredom and loneliness. People spend hours and hours sitting on their couches, eating popcorns, watching telly. But then came colored television, and people were really, really happy. And then came high definition picture quality. So science is constantly evolving. Science is constantly evolving. Now, when we talk about science and evolution, which is in constant process, and the progression of this evolution is more like an evolution of discovery. It's not like it never existed before and you have invented it or the scientists have invented it. Rather, it is an evolution of discovery. The more you pondered, the more you contemplated on certain things, the more veils were lifted from God, and you discovered more. In a similar way, this knowledge that we present to the world today is not new, is not fabrication, it is not invention, it is not any type, any kind of innovation. It has always existed in the higher realms. And today, we have been granted this knowledge. The grant of this knowledge today simply means this knowledge is newly disclosed, not even discovered. When you go and see somebody and you think it's an important meeting, or you're going for leisure, you're going on a trip, you make pictures with your iPhone, and straight away you click a button, iMessage, and you send it to anybody anywhere in the world. That was not possible a few years back. You used to carry cameras, right? And then you used to have the film roll. You would wait. until it is developed. It would take months, weeks, and then you would have those photographs on paper. But now, I don't think people are more prone into printing their photos. They have laptops, they have iPhones, they have iPad, and now they have thousands of photos. When I check my iCloud account in the last 5 years, I have more than 37,000 photos in my iCloud account. People used to be amazed, how can a Hafiz have the entire book in his memory? Some people can't even remember one sentence, and some have the entire book in their memory. The small chip can contain 64 gigabyte. And I give an example. When Sarkar started to explain what is the um, inner initiation, what is the invocation of the heart, what is zikr qalb, people were so oblivious of this knowledge. People were so unaware of this knowledge that they would ask the Lord, how can a fleshy heart say the name of God? And Sarkar would say, this tongue is also a fleshy thing. How does this tongue say the name of God? And then Sarkar returns with more explanation and more reasoning and more knowledge. And Sarkar says, this fleshy tongue does not have the ability to speak. In a similar way, this fleshy heart does not have the ability of saying God's name. This fleshy tongue is able to speak with the help of a corresponding soul which lies in the center of the chest. And there are cases whereby the tongue was found to be medically and physically fit, and the doctors were really surprised. Even when with the perfect tongue, some people were not able to speak, and medical science did not have any answer. The fleshy tongue is okay, but even then, they're not able to speak. And Sarkar, for the first time in human history, gave the answer. And Sarkar said, this is because this corresponding soul, which enables the tongue to speak, is diseased. And Sarkar then recollects a story whereby Sarkar was still in the jungle of Lal Bagh, and somebody was brought to Sarkar, and this person was not able to speak. And Sarkar said, they brought him to me, and I didn't want to be in contact with creature. Sarkar said Sarkar wanted to enjoy his loneliness and wouldn't want to be bothered by people. This is why Sarkar would never want to do something which would make Sarkar's presence prominent in that jungle. So Sarkar would deliberately keep a low profile. But then that day when that man who was not able to speak was brought to Sarkar in the jungle of Sevan, Sarkar felt pity for that guy, and Sarkar's sense of bountiful generosity was sort of invited. And Sarkar just blew his blissful breath upon him. And instantly he was able to speak. Sarkar might not have finished blowing on him, and he started to speak. No sooner he started to speak, people were overwhelmed with the happiness, and they were raising slogans, and Sarkar was being glorified. Sarkar was being praised. And Sarkar explains, what I did was nothing to do with his physical tongue. Something was wrong with the corresponding soul, and with Noor, with light, I fixed it, and he was able to speak. Just 30 years ago, when Sarkar was explaining to people that heart can also say God's name, heart can also speak. And people would put up questions like, how? The heart doesn't have a tongue. How can heart speak? And Sarkar gave these explanations. One, Sarkar established the fact that this physical tongue itself does not have any ability, doesn't have power of speech. Rather, it is the corresponding soul which rests in the center of the chest. And with the help of that soul, you're able to speak in a similar fashion, in a similar way. By the same token, there is a corresponding soul that sits on the fleshy heart. And with spirituality, that soul which sits on the fleshy heart has to be awakened. That soul, this corresponding soul, this particular soul has spiritual functions. Spiritual functions. If it is not awakened, you will keep yourself deprived of those spiritual functions. And what functions these could be? I mean, one of the most prominent function of that soul that sits on the heart is to enable you to communicate with God. With the help of that soul, once the soul has found its awakening, your heart will work like an iPhone. Make a call, send iMessages to God. You send messages to God, and God will reply to you, and you will see it on the screen of your heart. That's the spiritual function. And a majority of people who proclaim to be spiritualists, a majority of people who advocate spirituality are not aware of spirituality. I mean, this is one of the many features, spiritual features and functions of the heart. But in order to be able to use these spiritual functions, the soul that sits on the heart has to be awakened. Now, this is the knowledge which was granted to Prophet Adam. And with the help of this knowledge, he exceeded all other Adams in eminence. The poet of the East, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, who is the founder, one of the founders of Pakistan, he was a saintly person. He was aware of this knowledge. And he said, Dile bedar paida kar ke dil khabid hai jab tak na teri zarb hai kari na meri zarb hai kari. Awaken your heart. You will not avail anything. You will not avail any spiritual functions of the heart unless your heart is revived, your heart is awakened. A dormant soul on the heart will not avail you anything. And the awakening of this soul didn't used to be that easy. Awakening of this soul didn't used to be that easy like it is now. All thanks to His Holiness Gohar. All thanks to His Holiness Gohar. There were really high standards, conditions, prerequisites. And in addition to all these prerequisites and all these conditions, there was one more thing. You need to go through a vigorous austerity of mortification and purification of yourself. And by doing so, you were supposed to make yourself worthy of obtaining awakening of the soul that controls your heart. Now, because this was a tough job, this is why many people were not attracted to this type of knowledge. Number two, if somebody comes to me and tells me, Mr. Younus, I have a car that can fly, I have a car that will run without petrol, without diesel, without any power, right? And this car has wings, this car has this car has that. And he tells me everything about this car. And I can't see anything in the cars that I'm familiar with. Nobody tells me that there exists such a car. So I will not believe it. I will not believe it. Because there is no such car on the road. Nobody has such a car. And then all of a sudden one person comes to me and says, this car has wings, this car has this car has that. I won't believe it. And if he tells me, okay, I have this car, but you have to sell everything you have. Now, this is a difficult thing to do, really, because there is no example. I mean, I may conclude, oh, this person is just trying to make a complete idiot out of me. He wants to get all my money and then he will run away. Because I have not heard of such a car. And he won't show it to me unless I sell everything and give him everything. So in order to make up my mind, I need to have something in front of me which can convince me, yeah, that's true, go ahead. In a similar way, in spirituality, we say when you become a spiritual person, you're standing here and you're offering your salat here, and you will see you're standing in front of God. No. You'll be sleeping in your cozy bed, and somebody is going to be repeatedly mention God's name, and it would be reaching God's throne, and God would be happy. How can that happen? If I'm sleeping, who is doing it on my behalf? Well, if I'm sleeping, who will do this on my behalf? No, that's not possible. The people will say, oh, if this was possible, then were they all crazy going to the mosque 5 times a day? No, come on. This is just a fabrication. This is a cock and bull story. This happens, my friend, when people are not aware of such knowledge. And the knowledge of spirituality became extinct. Why? This knowledge is always projected by saints. There are religious scholars in every day and every age. But saints of God, it is hard to come by. And in the last 400 years, there has not been a saint of God, a true saint of God. That's why this knowledge became extinct. People don't practice it. The next generation comes, nobody talks about it, it becomes extinct. So Sarkar gave a complete introduction to spirituality. And oftentimes we used to say, prior to Sarkar's advent in this world, there had been so many prominent faqir, durvesh, and saints and mystics. They never said such things. I mean, we have the Grand Sheikh of Baghdad, Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He's a great sheikh. He's a wonderful spiritual master. But when you read his books, his works, he doesn't explain spirituality in details, at least in the same way, with the same amount of explanation, with the same amount of details, like Sarkar Gohar Shahi does. And one of the reasons that I can think of why the Grand Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani did not go into much details of his spirituality is that he may have had some kind of apprehension. Had he talked about the knowledge in details, people would not be able to relate to it because they did not have any example in front of their eyes. But His Holiness Gohar Shahi has, I think of Sarkar's way of teaching the secret knowledge is like those books that we have in America and England, where they say books for dummies. physics for dummies. It doesn't mean it's for dummies. It doesn't mean it's for dummies. But what we call it for dummies. Dummies mean, if somebody is really, a dummy like Bilal and Rafaqat, you need to explain everything in details and in the most possible easy way. When things have to be explained in minute details, some people have the ability to grasp the meaning, even if it's not fully explained. They are unfortunately known to be intellectuals. But people who must have every single minute details of everything, they are known to be dummies. So book for dummies means it is explained with all the details and nothing is missing. No more reasoning can be done. It is so easy to understand. Before I met Sarkar, I read a lot of Sufi books, but I couldn't understand any word. I mean, one of the most discouraging aspect of spirituality before Sarkar's arrival was that if somebody wanted to understand spirituality, there was no book which would explain spirituality to an extent that the reader is able to grasp the meaning of what is being said. For example, Ghazali Dawra, Imam Ghazali, and Mujaddid Alif Sani Rahmatullah alayh. I mean, the way they explain spirituality is like they're talking to angels, not to us. I don't understand. I really don't understand when they explain things. It's like they're exercising mighty, big, difficult words. And when Sarkar explained it, honestly, in order to understand the spirituality by Gohar Shahi, whether you are schooled or you are not schooled, you will equally understand. Whether you have been to a school or you have not been to a school at all. But if Gohar Shahi is explaining something, then those schooled and those who have not been schooled will understand Gohar Shahi equally. کیا شان ہے سرکار. There are many who haven't been to school, but they understood what Sarkar said. Now there are two factors. Number one, it is how Sarkar explains. Number one, it is mostly contributed to the fact how Sarkar explains it. Sarkar's way of explanation makes it easy for even unlettered people to understand. Number two, when the Lord Gohar Shahi speaks with Sarkar's words, divine energy is mixed. And Sarkar's words hit the heart. And meaning of Sarkar's words, along with words, is poured into the hearts like you pour water into a jug or a glass. The meaning of the words that Sarkar speaks is poured into your heart. And it is quite evident. For example, look, we don't speak like scholars, do we? One of the most prominent thing that our viewers must have noticed, that I myself cannot read Quran properly. This is why sometimes I read it with so many mistakes. But I don't care. As long as I understand it, as long as I can take spiritual benevolence from the words of God, who cares about right pronunciation? But this tells you that we haven't even been schooled about the Quran. But even then, Sarkar has poured the meaning, the true interpretation of the divine word with the power of his glance into our hearts. And even the ignorant people are now explaining spirituality. Now, if you're using an iPhone and you know how to send images via iMessage and email and WhatsApp and Viber and so many other applications that you have, having used iPhone, having used iMessage, having sent images and video and audio files, and having received audio, video files and images, if you deny spirituality, whereby God's image from one heart is transferred into another heart, you are a lunatic. And God has created this phenomenon world in order to tell you that its inner also exists. And according to a hadith, whatever you see in Zahir, it exists because it pre-exists in Batin. Whatever you see in Zahir, it exists because it pre-exists in Batin. Now, it is now easy to understand how the saints of God are so powerful and how they become a source of blessing for their fellow men. They have their souls awakened. They have divine energy in their eyes. They have divine energy in their heart. And what happens when their body and their soul and their heart is completely enlightened and it's completely spiritualized and completely energized with divine presence, what happens? Same thing. When you turn on a bulb, what happens when a bulb is turned on? The light which is released from the filament emanates from the glass of the bulb. In a similar way, when God's light sits in your heart, God's light will emanate from the body of that saint. And this is exactly what God meant when He described Prophet Muhammad's heart as Sirajum Munira. Siraj means lantern. Munira means lit up. Like God said in Quran, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's heart is like a lantern which is lit up with God's light. I mean, you wouldn't understand what Sirajum Munira means if you did not know this is spiritual knowledge that Sarkar Gohar Shahi has granted.
Aura TV. Guidance brought to you